All right, it's 11:30. I know there's still a few people coming in, but feel free to just find a spot. Welcome to The Holodeck is Real. Hashtag Real Holodeck, if you want to tweet about it. Just probably put up on here. I'm Dan Pacheco. I'm a professor up at Syracuse University at the SI Newhouse School. I have only been teaching there for a couple years now. I've worked in journalism and media, all on the digital side, for about 18 years before that. Joined here with Stephen King, another professor, also a veteran of the news industry. He's at UNC Chapel Hill. He's here too, and it just turns out we learned at last ONA's conference that we were both interested in the same thing, so we've been staying in touch. Our other panelists, Mitch Gelman, the VP of Product at Gannett Digital. Kind of a last-minute ad, and thank you for joining us, Mitch. Mitch and I and the Gannett folks worked on a project together, which we'll be talking about soon, called Harvest of Change, that uses the Oculus Rift. And then on Google Hangout today, we have Nani de la Peña, who is currently an AP Google Fellow. You can follow her at immersivejournalism.com. She's really my inspiration into virtual reality, which she'll be showing you a lot of what she's done. She's visited Syracuse. And she's pretty much been very gracious about sharing everything she knows, which is why I'm now sharing everything I know, because I think the power for both virtual reality and what my other friend who's on the panel, Lauren Covington, with a company called Norflux, he calls it body responsive interfaces. The idea that you are the interface to information, and the information is either coming into your environment, or in some cases, you are going into the. And it was all about the spoken word. And then soon after radio, you had video with television. All right, that was a 536-year period. What was unique is that you can talk to people and interact with them around content. Then we could carry the internet in our pockets, and it was about anytime, anywhere access, right, on your phone or your device. So everything is getting closer and closer to us, the point where we, as our bodies, we're almost like computers to an extent. It's just that we don't have it connected physically to our nerves, although that could happen at some point. What I think we're really moving into is the third chapter, which is the age of experiential media, where everything is about experiencing. You have all the other stuff you had before, text, audio, video, people that you can interact with, but we can now put you into stories and let you really use all your senses and all your muscles and everything to interact with it. And that's fundamentally different. And when you first try it out, you're going to see it. There's a demonstration down in the Midway at the Gannett booth, which Mitch Gelman will be talking about a little bit, where you can go in and try the Oculus Rift and try one of the first virtual reality news experiences that they've created. But it's fundamentally different, and I call it experiential media. It allows you to jump inside a story and interact with that environment in full 360 degrees. So the idea of looking at media and not being apart from you, that's all not necessarily going away, but there's entirely new capabilities now. And all of this really comes from the film industry, the gaming industry, merging together with the practices of journalism and documentary and nonfiction. And so I think it's a really exciting time, is what I tell my students all the time, an exciting time to be a journalist, because there's so many more tools at your disposal and if you really think beyond the basics, you'll kind of see that. So I just had to include this because not everybody, sadly, may know what a holodeck is. Star Trek: The Next Generation, I'm kind of guessing that you all over-index in having watched that in the 80s and 90s. But it introduced this concept of a holodeck where you could walk into a physical space, not unlike this room here, and then suddenly holograms would kind of take over the experience of what you'd see. Instead of seeing a big grid, it could be a tropical rainforest, or it could be you're in the ocean, or you're going through a spy novel or something like that. It seemed kind of like science fiction at the time, but it's now really starting to become possible. And the person who first, actually at an ONA, it was either 2 or 3 years ago, who showed me this, and I remember when she told me, I said, that sounds like science fiction. And she's like, no, this is real. And I went into this experience, which she's going to talk about, and it changed my life in the course of my career forever. And there are others in this room who have also had that experience. So unfortunately, Nani could not make it here this week in person. Her mother ended up having to go into surgery, but she's graciously offered to join us over Google Hangout. So I'm going to switch over to Nani. And Nani, if you could unmute yourself.
I just unmuted.
And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nani.
Thank you guys so much for coming in. And once again, I really apologize for having to do this at a distance. It is certainly not my favorite way to hear a presentation nor to present, but it was one of those emergency situations that we were hoping to avoid that became unavoidable. I'm going to go ahead and jump into my presentation by sharing my screen. And I do have something ready to go for you. So I think a lot of you know I've been calling this immersive journalism, although I'm wondering if Dan's term experiential media might be a better one. And I'm going to go ahead and just jump into some thoughts.
Do you hear me now, Nani?
We're
Nice
not
to
seeing
meet
your
you.
screen.
Not seeing my screen. I apologize. Let's try that again. Sorry. Come on, screen
This 2D
share.
virtual reality is kind of behind the 3D virtual reality right now.
Times. Just up.
Telepresence.
Share.
Okay,
How's that
here we
work?
go.
Are we seeing you, Dan?
Yes, now we see me looking at me.
Great. Let's go back to that then.
Great.
Okay.
Hear me now? Nice to meet you. Molt de gust.
I'm from Los Angeles, California.
Welcome to Barcelona. Benvinguda a Barcelona. I don't know, Nani, if I could ask you to raise your arms. A veure si pot aixecar els braços. Ja veieu que s'aixeca. Keep them up because now we'll show the robot. Ja anirem a veure el robot, que ja veieu. Can you move them a little bit more? A veure si els pot moure una mica més. Up and down. Doncs ja veieu que el robot reacciona perfectament amb la Noni. Noni, I'm ready to interview you now for a few minutes. Li farem una entrevista a la Noni per veure què ha semblat aquesta experiència. You're a journalist, ella és una periodista, i fa una estona entrevistat un científic de Barcelona. You just interviewed a recent
So for me, it starts to feel very natural after a while. Occasionally, there's some problems with the eye movement. I move too fast. But beyond that, very quickly, I'm in there and start to.
So how did I end up in?
Oh, we just lost somebody. Well, while we're waiting for Nani to call back in, she probably hit the wrong button. What was happening there is she was connected to a robot in Barcelona from Los Angeles. She had a motion capture suit on, and she was controlling all of the actions of it. You talk about telepresence and VR. It's
Dan, did we drop the call? Drop the thing?
yeah. We now we're seeing our screen again. So could you switch back to the PowerPoint?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
How's that? Okay, so I was saying, how did I end up in two places at once? That there's, back in 1998, if you look at this early Village Voice article called The Rape in Cyberspace, which was a text-based virtual world, and he managed to hack in, quote, raping the women. And they were incredibly upset. They felt physically violated. We just have this really strong sense of our connection from our virtual world to our physical world. And it's kind of amazing. I always show this slide. This guy is seeing himself from behind, and through the perspective of that video camera behind his body. And when they brought a hammer down, as if they were going to hit the video camera, it felt like it was going to come down and hit his chest. He jumped. So he felt like he was where he was seeing himself from, rather than where he was actually sitting. We're hardwired to adopt representations of ourselves as real. Some of you may know that I originally built a virtual Guantanamo Bay prison in Second Life in 2007. It was rebuilt for the Moscow Museum of Modern Art in 2013. And the idea was to create a place that was virtual but accessible in contrast to the inaccessible prison. We relied very carefully on material I had collected as part of a documentary film I had done back in 2004. This was a photograph of how prisoners were smuggled into the prison. This is what happened in the virtual world. Another piece that I did that some of you may know about, I was looking at Freedom of Information Act release documentation of a man who the Bush administration had said had been tortured, Al-Qahtani, and this was the first time I used the full embodied virtual reality goggles, as you can see in the background, early goggles. And we asked people just to sit upright in a chair when they went through this experience, that we put them in a body of a detainee in a stress position. And he's sitting up, he's wearing a breathing strap, sitting up with arms behind his back. Yet, everybody reported they were hunched over in a stress position. It blew my mind. That's when I really recognized how powerful this medium was. When I was a research fellow in the journalism school at USC, started working on a larger project that Sandy Poland was running in a class looking at hunger in Los Angeles, hunger in California. It was jointly with other groups around California, and it was additional, including the Center for Investigating in California Watch. It wasn't, what I would now consider traditional reporting, in that it was an online site that had video, photographs, and text. But I wanted to do an immersive piece, and we started recording audio at food banks. I had an intern. This particular day, the line was so long that a man waiting in this line for food, he collapsed and went into a diabetic coma. And using that audio, we rebuilt the piece. And this is a piece that was at the ONA a couple years ago. I'm going to show you a little bit of video on it just to give an idea about what happened and what people's experience was like.
Okay, he's having a seizure. Okay.
So you can see this guy. He feels like he's actually in the room with the body now. Oh my God. He feels like he's in that space, in that urgent moment. So that's just a presence of being in there with those people. He's watching the woman calling 911. He's very careful not to step around on the body. This is a common experience with VR. You feel like you're present on scene. There's a woman who's down, crouched over the body. It's really kind of a strange mind trick. You get this duality of presence. Another person down there with the body. And the reactions were intense.
What'd you think? Oh, you're crying.
And I had a lot of people, and I cried through this. I'm sure people like Jeannie Brooks can tell you a little bit about what the experience was like for her. But just a quick hat tip. The Oculus Rift, which I think some of you may know about, I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, was created by Palmer Luckey, who was our lab assistant at the time. And he actually prototyped, along with the other lab people, the goggles I use. You can kind of see them there. They're all duct taped together. That's the prototype. And of course, Oculus Rift, we know, was bought for $2 billion at Facebook. More recently, as doing my AP Google scholarship that ONA supported, and Tribeca, I was looking at the death of a migrant who lived in the U.S. for 27 years, brought over as a kid. During the downturn, he couldn't get any work because, of course, he had papers. He was doing construction, fixing pools. And he stole a bottle of tequila and a steak for his wife. Had never been arrested before, got caught, deported, and when he tried to sneak back in, he was beaten and tased to death by Border Patrol. Originally, and actually on the U.S. side, they caught him, roughed him up. He complained to a supervisor, and the supervisor, rather than doing anything, sent him out to the same dark area where he was beaten and tased to death. In that event, we only had grainy footage, right? And so we had to rebuild the piece with the audio to get people on scene. And this is a pretty intense bit of audio, which I'll skip right now just in terms of time. We built it in Unity. And here's with this young woman, one of the other witnesses who captured the scene from above that showed how many officers were involved. We brought her into our lab, and I body scanned her and I facial scanned her. So I could put her in as herself, and I also body captured her and facial captured her. So all of the recreation is through her own body, not through mine, meaning she recreates her own story through her body as much as through her words. But here's the amazing thing. When we recreated that moment of her overlooking on the bridge, to the people what they looked like when they saw it at the Tribeca Film Festival. Everybody's trying to peer over that bridge to see what's going on. People feel like they're there. Very quickly, I'll show you this last bit on Project Syria. This was a commission by the World Economic Forum last January. Obviously very relevant today. All this stuff is really hitting home. And let me show you the So again, we tried to also send a team to the border of Syria to record material at a refugee camp, which is the second part of this. And that original scene of Syria, not only did we get the source video, but we had to go and find all the cell phones around that moment to get more aftermath, because that video ends, in order to build it. And then I sent a team to Syria, on the border of Syria, to capture children at a refugee camp, and we tried to put them in as themselves. That was seen by people, everyone from Peter Gabriel to John McCain, and of course the Syrian contingent, who were really pleased to see themselves represented at the World Economic Forum situation. Just to give you an idea, it went to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and we had 54 pages of comments in the visitors book to respond to it. So that means we had audiences, children, adults, senior citizens, all ages from all over the world who just happened to stumble into the piece. The curators told me they'd never seen such an outpouring in the guest books ever before. It just gives you an idea of how powerful the medium is. I know I did just sort of wrap up. Just finished up a Formula One piece, which was kind of fun. It recreated real scene in a pit, and allowed people to be there at the pit and experience what it's like to be down at the track. And again, people really felt like they were there. So I think we're running out of time here, but that whole concept of being there is really important. And finally, why now with virtual reality? Of course, the access to high-speed internet, extraordinary processing power computer chips, which in 20 years is 8,000 times powerful. Allows the graphics to move really fast, so you don't have lag, and it can trick the mind so you don't see the changes in the screen. And of course, the cost. I was working with these 5 years ago, and putting you in that body. These were $50,000. Now the Oculus Rift going on sale for $350,000. Okay, thanks very much.
All right. Thanks, Nani. So as you can see, Nani has been involved in this for quite a while. And there are others out there. It's just that until recently, it wasn't journalists. So this VR space really goes back 20 to 30 years if you look into it. And it was labs that cost multi-millions of dollars were required to do this. Now, for $350, you can order the equipment to do it on your own computers. It's really incredible. Nani mentioned the Oculus Rift. That started with a Kickstarter campaign. And it wasn't until after Palmer Luckey, who was her lab assistant, or the lab assistant at USC, if you didn't pick up on that, he went and took that prototype, and they got $2.4 million. The way that the Oculus works, or any VR headset like this, it's a little hard to see the images here at this view, and you can try this down at the Gannett Lounge. You have basically something like, actually, you have exactly a Samsung Galaxy Note 3 screen in there. It was recently revealed. It's a very large AMO LED screen. And then there are two lenses that focus the image so it goes outside of your range of view. And that's what makes you feel like you're there, plus the stereoscopic view within it. Mark Zuckerberg got wind of this, went and tried the Oculus Rift, and plunked $2 billion down. So I now call it on your Facebook. And what he said was actually, I think, really prescient and said a lot about, I think, what the impact for journalism here. He said, we're going to make Oculus a platform for many other experiences. Imagine enjoying a courtside seat at a game, right? The NFL virtual ticket or something like that. Studying in a classroom of students, so distance learning and teachers all over the world where you feel like you're physically present there, or consulting with your doctor face-to-face. This is really a communication platform more than just a gaming platform. It's something that you may miss if you look at a lot of the press about Oculus, because it's the gaming companies and movie companies that are going into it first. But we also have journalists and journalism companies getting into this, and it really is going to go out there and fundamentally change the face of media. It's driven also by a whole lot of other technologies that used to be in the tens of thousands or even millions and have now come down to the $200 level. There are these structural scanners that can see the physical structure of a space, all right? I'm going to show you an example of what that means soon here. But basically, the photo or video of the future may in fact be something that's more like a 3D amalgamation with the visual. And that may be the default that people expect. Down the line, I think that there's potential for what I call transferred reality, where you could actually attend a live game or some live event, or the broadcast journalist in the future could go out there with a 360 camera that's capturing both structure, the physical structure of the space, and all the people and the images, and you really could feel like you're there and move through it. It sounds like total science fiction, like a holodeck, but this is real. This here is just one image of what the new Kinect 2 sensors can see, and actually this was when I was at Gannett Digital this summer. We pulled one out, and that on the left there is me waving, and if you notice, you'll see other people around the conference kind of doing things to see if it sees them. It's not just seeing their structure, but it can tell where their skeleton is. All right, that's crazy. It can also even see your heartbeat. All right, so these things that information can be used in so many different ways. There are other less expensive structural scanners out there that Stephen King's going to show one called the Leap Motion. You can get it at Best Buy now for $79. And that there, you can't see it, it can see your hands, so every single joint, and you can then use that information to determine what people are, what kind of moves around. You can also do just really simple things like this for almost nothing. This here is a gesture interface wall, that a really early version that I set up in my office, and this person is swiping through a photo gallery. It's all based on this input from the Kinect sensor that can see what she's doing, and then it's making decisions about what to do with the interface based on where her hand is. This is something that Lauren Covington specializes in, and he's going to be talking later today. When you put all these together,
all right, if you put your hand down,
you can do things like this.
See the crosshairs on it?
A little bit. My hand.
So this here is a student in one of my classrooms. This is up on YouTube. It's called The Day My Classroom Became a Holodeck. This student, Valerie, she's got an Oculus Rift on, and then there's a Kinect camera on top of it that can see her hands. That's wirelessly transmitting information to Lauren's computer here, so that he can bring it all together. And this is what she's seeing. I'm going to actually pause it really quickly so you can see what's going on. But that there is, what she sees is not that classroom. She's seeing an Escher painting, and she's inside of it. And then there's a flat surface in front of her, and it's Google Maps. And she's swiping through Google Maps and using it like a multi-touch interface, and it's not even physically there. So that really shows the limits of what is possible with this kind of technology, and with some creative hackers like Lauren, which is why I hang out with them a lot. You may think these structural cameras are really expensive. You can get one now for $300 on Kickstarter again. Actually, they launched. It's called the Structure Scanner. I have it right here at the end of the session. If you want to be 3D scanned, I can do that and email your 3D scan to yourself. And with this little scanner, what you can do is things like this. Here's one of my students just yesterday who I scanned. And on the iPad, you can see it's captured all of the structure of his face, his hair, his shirt, everything, and then texture mapped instantly all of the visual information of him on top of that. So when I say this is the, it could be the photo of the future, that's what we're talking about. So imagine that being live. That's how it could be the video of the future. So I'm going to shift over to talk a little bit about my summer at Gannett. Mitch Gelman here, when I went, Jennifer Carroll actually invited me to give a little presentation, and then after about, I don't know, 20 minutes, Mitch looked at me and said, hey, would you like to come here and spend the summer with our developers? I said, sure, why not? I'm a professor of practice. It's kind of good for me to be out there in the field. And what was interesting is about a lot of different technologies. And the one that they really focused on was the Oculus Rift. And they wanted to really kind of do something similar to what Nani had done, but with something that really spoke to the interests of their audiences in their 120 different news centers. And there are really two approaches to what they did. You can see some images on the right here. At the top, there's the idea of virtually recreating a scene that you then use as a navigational aid through a story. So at the very top right there, what you see, it's a little hard in this lighting, but there's a tractor, in this case, that the 3D object modeler was recreating, and he's put a 2D high-definition photo up in his software, and then it's almost like watching him build it out of clay in front in 3D. It was a really amazing process to watch. Ray Soto is his name. He comes from the video gaming industry, and I mean, I think we saw a new type of journalist being born this summer, which I thought just was really cool. It was a gamer turned a journalist, recreating reality. And then what's really unique that I think is a first, not just for journalism, but for anybody in any industry, is merging 360-degree video in with the virtual experience. So Adrian, who's in the front here, if you're interested in knowing about 360 video, the company was Total Cinema 360. We all went out to Southwest Iowa where the story takes place, and we had to get away from the camera because there's no behind the camera in 360. Probably the most boring photo or video shoot you can go to, just so you know, if you're not actually under the camera. And if you're under the camera, you're trying to stay out of it. It's kind of funny. But back to the VR, I mean, you can really see there was impeccable attention to detail in this story. I think it's the best example yet of transferred reality. So rather than just talk about it, I'm just going to show a quick video clip of what this was about.
The Des Moines Register partnered with Gannett Digital to create a unique virtual rendering of the Dahmen farm for viewing in the Oculus Rift, a virtual reality headset that makes viewers feel as if they are part of the experience. Starting with aerial imagery plus photos and video of the farm, the Gannett Digital team used a video game platform called Unity to recreate the farm in 3D. The team also partnered with Total Cinema 360, a New York City film company that used specialized cameras to record audio and video in 360 degrees. Many of the textures in the 3D experience came directly from photographs captured by the Register. The finished immersive experience takes viewers on a virtual tour of the Dahmen Farm's shop, the site of the original family home that now serves as the nerve center of its business. Exploring the 3D landscape reveals a dozen 360-degree video segments, plus historical and current photos that tell how the family, like all Americans, faces challenges in a changing America.
So I'm going to turn over to Mitch Gelman, VP of Product at Gannett Digital, to share some of his thoughts on this whole process. It was pretty amazing.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Nani, for showing us all how this type of media could be used to begin to tell stories in new ways, and Dan for introducing us to the technology. There's a number of people in this room who participated in the project. Could all of you stand up and wave to your colleagues? If you have any questions or if you want to see what we came up with, it's available, as Dan said, in the back of the midway, and any of these folks can answer questions about how we pulled it together. Amelie Nash, come on up, Amelie, is the editor of the Des Moines Register. We chose to do this with the Des Moines Register because it's one of our more technically savvy newsrooms across Gannett. They're all becoming technically savvy, but Des Moines has been really moving quickly to adopt to a digital-first workflow. The goals for the project were, first off, to connect the news to what I call the Minecraft generation. Who here has children, nieces, nephews, neighbors, students between the ages of 10 and 20? Who shares my, frustration of not being able to communicate with my 10-year-old son because he spends most of his time embedded in Minecraft, Clash of Clans, or Call of Duty? I think as an industry, we feel sometimes as if we've been abandoned by the next generation of news consumers. I see it from the other perspective. I believe that we have abandoned them. Every generation consumes news and information in different ways, and I was hopeful that if we could figure out a way to use gaming technology, speak to this group in its own language and in its own experience, we would be able to do a better job of communicating that news and information to them. I call it finding the new front porch. The idea behind that is that if a newspaper hit the front porch, 30, 40 years ago, you picked it up and you read it on the porch or at your kitchen table. Then the front porch moved into the living room and you sat on the couch and the television talked to you as your new front porch. Then the front porch moved to the desktop. Now that front porch appears to be in gaming consoles and not only on a device, but also with an experience, with a language. And what we wanted to do this summer was begin to experiment with that language and come up with ways to tell stories in a manner that this generation already understands and would be interested. My son is not going to read a newspaper. He is not going to sit in front of the TV and listen to Brian Williams read him the news for half an hour at 7 o'clock at night. But he will get absorbed into an interactive experience using gaming technology. So what we were able to do then was what Dan calls transferred reality, which is to take the journalism values that we hold dear, whether through explanatory journalism or maintaining facts and the consistency, working to make if it was a case tractor on the farm, it's a case tractor in the gaming experience, paying attention to the ambient sounds, recording them live on the farm and porting them into the virtual experience, paying great attention to detail so that what we created was not simply a fun and interactive experience, but it was also journalistically sound. And this is where we work closely with Amelie and her reporters and editors and photographers in Des Moines to maintain the journalistic integrity and transfer it from the reporting into the virtual experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, just in terms of this being more than just a new experience and more than just something that's, great to get in there and be able to see news in a different way. And one of the things that was really important to us when we got involved in the project was the idea of having a really good story behind it, so that it wasn't just you get to visit a farm in Southwest Iowa and look, this is really cool, you can experience it in a different way, but that we were really talking about these themes that really sort of run across the entire nation in terms of aging, demographics, how technology is changing farming, how climate change is affecting it. And so we really went into it with a very strong story plan that you see through the 5-day series that we've published, in the newspaper, online, and then obviously in this experience. So for us, it was about really having a good story that would be transcending virtual reality and also being part of things that affect Iowans' lives and people's lives around the country.
So in speaking to that, when my 10-year-old first played it, he said, "Dad, this farm is kind of boring. You need to have chickens on it so that if you catch a chicken, it lays an egg and you get a fun fact." Well, the farm wasn't a poultry farm, so we decided not to put in chickens, but we came up with other ways to hide and embed fun facts and photos and give you a reward if you're able to collect all 12.
Yeah, there's a strong gamification angle to this, although I guess gamification is going out of style, but it's a fun experience. You can actually try it yourself at the Midway, at the Gannett booth. It's all the way in the back. There are 3 different Oculus Rifts there, and also tomorrow from 12:30 to 2 over in the Gannett Salon, I have a map to that if you need it. A little few cards here, some people in the front. We'll actually be doing a workshop to show how you get started doing this yourself. Because Gannett has, I think, very smartly realized that this needs to be a movement that is for all journalists. And they're opening up their space and their knowledge and expertise to help others kind of catch the bug.
Yeah,
because you saw it started from Nani, who probably caught it from someone else, and then it came to me, and now it's with Gannett. And we think this is so powerful in helping people really not just understand information, but really have empathy for it, feel like they are there. And I think that's really what's different about this.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's it's about trying to reclaim a potential audience that may not exist for us in 5 to 10 years unless we meet them where they live and where they entertain and where they absorb information. So in order to do that, in order to reclaim them, we're hopeful that these new technologies are going to allow us to restore some of the empathy, remove some of the bias, and create a fun experience through which to consume news. So thank you to Nani and Dan and Emily and everybody on the Gannett team who worked with us to pull this together. Please go to the Midway, enjoy it, and let us know what you think. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Emily. So I want to turn it over to Stephen King now, who's going to show how it doesn't just stop here, and it's not just all about virtual reality. So I'll turn it over to Stephen. Some cool stuff.
So this is a little bit different approach. So what we're trying to do is say, how can we take this new interaction level to people in their homes and other places without any added technology or things that are going to be in their laptops and in their devices coming soon. So the Xbox Kinect, which you can see right here, this is the first version, and it's one we did. We worked with some guys at MIT's but not necessarily finite movements of my hand and fingers. So we had one of our user tests was 4'6", and so the top nav, everybody puts the top nav on a website, right? So she's reaching and almost jumping to try to reach. So we quickly realized that's probably not the best situation. So the next step was creating an interface using the same technology, but that was designed for this technology. So a little bit better instructions, and then some just very simple gestures to control the slideshow, essentially. And if you want to read it here, you can read the article. It's not formatted because it's formatted for an HD screen. But you can navigate and consume media. So this one was designed for that particular type of interface. So the Kinect is a really good thing for controlling the body and working with that. But then comes the Leap Motion. Okay, so this is a much smaller device and a much more finite control. And I'm going to show you. So this is the New York Times version. We were doing some of the research while the Leap Motion was coming out, and the idea was to be able to what could we do with news and to figure out how to better present news using gestures. So if you watch my hand, I'm scrolling with the finger. When we were doing our testing here, we were trying to scroll like this, and this is really awkward, and your shoulder gets tired. And so my graduate assistant who was working with me on this, then she went to go to the New York Times to help with the user interface with this. She was like, we should just do this kind of scroll concept, right? So that's built into the API, and anything you want to click on, you just hold your finger still over it. It opens the story, and you can scroll through and read the story and move away. So this is consuming news in a different way. So think of this as your large screen. You could get your news, and we could do it with video and lots of other things, by simply just having it in your bedroom. You've got a screen up there, you're brushing your teeth. We can know that you're brushing your teeth from that particular gesture. We give you the news in 2 minutes because dentists say you should brush your teeth for 2 minutes, and when you're done in 2 minutes, the news is over, then you can stop brushing your teeth. We can bring all of these things kind of into the world in which you live, right? And so what are those next steps, and how do we continue to evolve it? Now what's really nice is kind of where the technology is going, and so now there's a JavaScript API, so anyone who can code in JavaScript can work on this. So just to show you, this is basically a Google News reader, and so it basically pulls it in, and I can use gesture interfaces to view and see content in Google News. So if you're a developer and you have a little bit of JavaScript experience, you know what Bootstrap is, I can, in an hour, teach you how to do this. So I've got 15 devices here from Leap Motion that they've provided. So if you want to check them out, and like in an hour we can have you up and running, I'm happy to let you play with one of those and kind of show you how it works. And also they've given us like 15% off. So there's a coupon code that I just tweeted out. And so if you want that, go ahead and get it. It's 15% off if you want to get one. Not that I'm working for them.
$80.
Yeah, so it makes it like $69 or something, right? But the really interesting thing, so I was talking to one of the engineers at Leap Motion, and it's not just that they're going to have this dongle that we have now. They're already into HP laptops, and they're going to be in more and more laptops. They're going to be in the tablets, but they're also going to be in the next 2 years. You're going to see them in large screen televisions. You're going to see them in art installations. You're going to see them in your car. So imagine interacting with the interfaces of your car with gestures. Now, I'm not quite sure how that works while you drive, but they're working through those things, and they really see that.
Your car with gestures.
So, yeah, drive your car. Yeah, do you do it like this? So, so there's a lot more things coming, and so what we're trying to do is figure out how do we meet and tell stories in those mediums as we're arriving there, so that it's not that the technology is just beating us there, but we're getting there right then there for new storytelling models and new places to interact with our audience.
All right, thanks, Stephen. And on that note, we have our last panelist, who is Lauren Covington, who is also, for different reasons, was not able to make it, but he's been very patient, waiting. So we're just about to bring you up, Lauren.
Okay.
You're up, and we can hear you.
Great.
Actually.
Well, again, I'm terribly sorry I'm not there. I was really looking forward to this, but I was struck with the gastric hammer. So it's better I'm here.
Yeah, it's been reality has been staging war against virtual reality this week. I was in the hospital a week and a half ago.
Yes, he made a great recovery. So anyway, I'm Lauren Covington, just a really quick backgrounder. My college experience was actually studying animal behavior, ethology, which is the field study of animal behavior from an evolutionary perspective, and also evolutionary theory, also psychology, and I double majored in filmmaking at the time. And right out of college, ended up starting an interactive video company, and this was in the early 80s. The PC wasn't even out yet at that point. So we were a little far ahead of our time, but what we were very interested in was thinking about interactive storytelling and how do you actually do an interactive movie, those kinds of things. So that's been very much a theme that I've been working on sort of over the years, and went other places, robotics and whatnot. Now, last 5 or 6 years, have been specifically doing interactive installations, interactive art, interactive performances, that kind of thing, and sort of developing some technology along the way, or utilizing new technology. So let me delve into a little presentation here. I trust you're seeing that.
Yep, we see it.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little different tack. I'm not going to really talk about technology. I'm going to sort of talk about the experience and psychology of things that go on. And so immersion, you're soaking in it now, and I'm dating myself with that popular culture reference. There we go. The main thing is it's all around you. You know, it's right now. You're immersed in an environment. It's just, unfortunately, not a very interesting environment, except maybe a few things you're paying attention to. But there's a lot there anyway. And your senses and your mind, everything in you has sort of evolved over millions of years to really take all of this in all the time. And you're processing it, but you're just not consciously aware of all of these things you're doing, but your brain is, and it's actually registering on you. And you'll know very quickly if something goes wrong in the room, or there's some kind of disturbance, or somebody's upset somewhere near you. You'll pick up on these kinds of things. So where do these sensations go? Well, they're not just from your body. You don't just get them from your senses. They actually register there. You read your emotions from your body. More and more research, brain research is indicating this. It's that your body doesn't react to what your mind is registering. Your mind actually reads how your body is responding, and that's where the emotion comes from. People that have a lot of their body systems cut off can't experience some emotions because that's really where it comes from. The reason for this is that your basic senses and your brain are very old. They evolved and sort of worked their way up, and consciousness got layered on top of this. So your consciousness and your sort of sense of self reads down from those lower layers. And experiences are literally gut-wrenching because the gut part comes first, and then you're realizing it as that experience is sort of the latter part. And this is why I think this immersion is important. And just as a quick reference, I've gone through Nani's Hunger in LA, and I'm very familiar with computer graphics, VR, for years and years, since the 90s, that kind of stuff. But when I was in there, these were all more abstract information systems. But when I was in there and that guy dropped and started having that seizure, my gut tightened. It was a visceral, experiential thing. And these deep experiences come best through all of the senses. But immersion is also bidirectional, and this is the part that really gets me. The sensory immersion is just the one part, but the other thing is interaction. Because when I do something and then that world reacts to me, that's a visceral proof. My brain really connects it that this world is a real world that I'm in. One of the interesting things that a number of people have started reporting on is a phenomenon called VR loneliness. That if you're in a VR world, but you can't really do anything in that world, it sort of makes you feel almost alone, like you're sort of powerless. And that can make you feel very strange, and you sort of have to experience to understand it. The other thing is that I've personally experienced this to a great degree, and I've read other people have also, is that once you start interacting in that VR world, once you come out of it, there's a sense of dissociation. You actually feel like, wait a minute, reality is now a virtual world, because you had bought into where you were. So to me, interactivity is a very important part of it. Now, there's different degrees of immersion. Right now, we're sort of just talking about, oh, well, here's this, head-mounted display, the Rift, that you can put on. That's what's getting a lot of the press. But there's a lot of other different degrees from instead of going all whole hog with that. And those are virtual reality walls, which can be displays. They're large, that sort of look 3D, look like they're portaled into another world. But also even smaller things, perspective tracking displays. The Amazon Fire Phone has a thing where as you tilt the phone, you look into it, and you're actually getting different views. And the thing that Dan already talked about, the structure for the iPad, is also a similar thing. You're now sort of getting a portal into this other immersive world. And you can combine these, and this is where I'm really interested, in an environment. So you can sort of spread these things around. And let me break this and show you a quick video. This is a VR wall. I'm holding a camera up to my head, basically right over my forehead, and I'm walking up to this wall, and this wall is going to suddenly start tracking me. And so this is just a two-dimensional wall, but now as I'm walking around, it knows where I am, and it's changing the graphics and actually allowing me to experience walking around in this molecule. I did this with a chemist at a nearby university. He wanted to inside his molecule. So as you can see, it's moving around like I was actually walking around inside of this thing. And this is an interesting part. You can see me holding my hand out. That's that little shadow appearing there. And what you're seeing is I know where my hand is, and I'm drawing a line from the nearest part of the molecule to my hand, so I can identify by holding my hand out in space what component of the molecule I'm interested in. Let's see if I can go back this properly. There we go. Whoops, I'm sorry, I went back to the wrong one. So I want to get off the screen, though. I'm really interested in make our environments more rich. Unfortunately, the built environments we have are extremely information poor. We have evolved for really complex things, where things were happening outside of us in nature all of the time. And this, to me, is a good explanation why there is such a focus on mobile devices. Our environments are so poor that even when we have just this little tiny thing that gives us a whole lot of information, we become like, ooh, that's so wonderful, I've got to look at it all the time. So I really want to get that information out off the screen and into our environments. So an interesting thing that is happening now is there is the web page, which universal technology now, seems like it's tremendously, how can you possibly get to a virtual world through a web page? Well, there are new technologies that I'm incredibly excited about where virtual worlds can literally come off of a web page. These are HTML5, WebGL, and what's just now being developed with via Chrome and Mozilla is WebVR. The interesting thing about this is there's no plugins required in the browser. You plug in your headset or your VR device, and boom, you go to a web page, and now you are in that virtual reality world. So this is using all standards-based underneath it. So let me show you, whoops, sorry. Very quickly, this is actually just a WebGL web page. This was not anything I created, and the person you see in front of you is just you standing in front of this and using my software then to gesturally interact with this WebGL web page. This is literally an unmodified web page you can see inside of Mozilla or Chrome. Okay, this is one of the Chrome experiments. And it's totally unmodified for the interaction, just emulating mouse clicks is all I'm doing with this thing. So it's one thing when it's on a web page, but when you're actually standing there in front of it and your gestures are rotating this whole dimensional globe with information flowing around it, it becomes tremendously impactful.
I think we just have a couple more minutes, Lauren.
Okay, I'm almost done. So these systems, I believe, really be used to enhance our real world. We can take these things out and put them into our real world using different displays.
Oh. Wow, I'm happy we got that far. Well, I think we're about to move into questions anyways. I do want to point out, if you want to see some of what Lauren was talking about, his website is noirflux.com. It's NOIRFLUX.com. There's a lot of examples of that. His basement is called the Electric Heliotrope Theater, and it's pretty cool. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. It's also, if you go to, in a Chrome browser, go to chromeexperiments.com. There are all these WebGL experiments you can see there that are really pretty amazing, and that's what he's talking about, where you're not using a plugin. So we have about 5 minutes left now for questions. So if anybody has any questions, just you can step up to the microphone. Anybody? Or you can just raise your hand and yell it out.
Compelling, this new medium, but I'm working on putting
Hey, Lauren,
into it.
you actually jumped, your video went out, so we've moved on to questions now.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry.
This was the last slide anyway.
So we have our first question now.
Yeah, my question to anyone really on the panel is, what do you think it will take for this to go mass market, for people to really adopt this kind of thing? Is it the manufacturers? Or is it just really powerful applications? Is it gaming? What do you think it will be?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on which technology you're talking about. You look at things like the Leap Motion. You can buy those now. It's already going mass market by just force of the fact that it's showing up in laptops. And then the Oculus Rift is really kind of taken on a life of its own with gamers, but to then reach the mass market, I think personally, it's all going to come down to content. The content that people care about, which means you need to have a lot of different types of content providers and different experiences. And I think Oculus has seen that. I think Leap has seen that. They're very open with everything. If you want to develop on any of these platforms, everything is free to get started. And it's becoming, whenever there's even a cost, like Oculus used to charge, or I'm sorry, Unity 3D, which is the software that you use to create VR experiences. It used to be $1,500, and they just made it free. So
I think price point is one of the big keys, and then the other thing is doing the right thing for the right device. So like, you're not going to sit here and type email with this device, right? You got to find the right way of telling the story in that, and so finding those types of good uses. So when this thing first came out, everybody thought they were going to be controlling their computer with this, and you can control it, but you're not going to control everything. And so finding that right medium and use case and storytelling parts of it, when all that comes together, people start using them for very specific purposes, and then I think you'll see a mass adoption.
Did Nani or Lauren want to address that, or I think we all probably agree on the answer.
Can you do me a favor? Could you repeat the question, Dan, so I can hear the question?
It's at what point, what do you think is required to make this kind of technology go mass market?
I just think it's really a matter of people putting the energy towards it, because once the Oculus hits the market for the consumer version, which is really within months now, and other people are getting into the game super fast with goggles. So my guess is we're just talking a few years. And the real problem for not going mass market is the lack of content. So it's really up to these people in this room who are the content creators to take advantage of this moment when there isn't a lot of content out there and help shape best practices for journalism in virtual reality, which I think is a really important issue, thinking about how people still have critical thinking when they're immersed in a very experiential and can be a really intense environment.
Great. All right, we have another question here, and feel free to state your name too and where you're from.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Yael. I'm a freelancer living in Phoenix. And my question is, it's something I kind of thought about during the Trayvon Martin trial, actually, when they were going to do sort of an interactive video explaining one person's perspective of what might have happened. How do you kind of address, obviously, like with immersive technology, it hits harder. People kind of, confuse reality with an interpretation of it. So how do you address those like media ethics issues with this technology?
Yeah, so what's the role of media ethics in visceral experiential journalism? Really great question. Our friends at Gannett want to address this? How do you think about that journalistically? Like, would you take someone right into, say, an Al-Qaeda execution? Probably not.
Well, I think that the power of these emerging technologies are ones that we need to be mindful of. I see it as the same point that live television was in when it was able to go live. They came up with the 7-second delay. But this is going to create new issues, and we're going to have to work together to find the right balance. Occasionally, when people talk now about journalism and the trust that we as journalists have lost with much of our audience, what I hear most often is bias and a lack of empathy. There's a great power in these emerging technologies that will allow us to remove bias and to restore empathy, but we have to work together to figure out the right way to do it.
I'd like to add one thing, which is these issues are already for long-term journalism in terms of how do people discern propaganda versus the truth. And even recently in Twitter, there's been this discussion about whether Twitter should be able to censor certain tweets. One example is ISIS. Has been very, very good at co-opting Twitter feeds. Even in the Napa quake, they were, using Napa after the Napa earthquake. They were using the Napa quake hashtag to put up ISIS propaganda. So these are not issues that we haven't tried to tackle. The main important thing to remember is when you make these pieces, they start from good journalism. You have to go out and record the audio, be on scene, do your research. All your journalistic skills have to be brought into, to bear when you start building these after that end of the art. I mean, really, you start with your traditional practices first. And we have had to have these debates previously, and I hope that what we've learned in the past can be brought to bear in the future as we make really important pieces.
Stephen?
Imagine if we would have done this type of experience in the Boston bombings. What kind of questions do you have to answer as to what do you show, and could you create that? And let's say we take in the, you can download what a sidewalk looks like. But what if that sidewalk was not the exact same color as the sidewalk in Boston? Does it matter? Yes, and probably does, because now you have blood on the sidewalk, right? And so how much of these, there's a lot, when you start creating the world, I think we have a lot of questions that we need to answer with that. And it's going to take experience in working through those things as a good ethical journalist.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of point out too that we need journalists in this new storytelling form, setting good examples, because this will also be used for propaganda. It'll be used for probably the most manipulative types of PR you could imagine. And we can't stop that. But I think we need to, to be in there in the game, so to speak, early on.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got a couple more. I think there's.
A super quick question.
Okay.
For the register, sorry. So this is really cool, and I love the idea of reaching new viewers. Did you think about it being a farm? Like, is that content the kind of content that a new audience wants to engage with, or did you do that deliberately because actually, yes, they do want to engage?
That's a great question, and it goes to the point earlier about the state of the technology and the journalistic values and ethical issues surrounding it. We could have gone to the Mardi Gras. We could have gone to a rodeo, or we could have Dad Adrian over here strap a 360 grandma onto the back of a crocodile wrestler and told those stories. We selected the farm. We selected an explanatory journalism approach. Many people in America feel unsettled by the rapid pace of multiple changes that are affecting their lives, and we wanted a controlled environment in which we could discover whether or not this type of media lent itself to nonfiction storytelling. So we selected the farm, we selected the items on the farm, and wanted to make it as true to life as possible. I think what you're going to see now is a lot more aggressive, more exciting environments and use of the technology to bring people places that they can't otherwise go. But it was a very conscious decision to test the journalistic value of this media in a story that would show us whether or not it was feasible. And the farm and working with our colleagues in Des Moines was a perfect place to manifest the journalistic storytelling values in a virtual environment.
And really, before you leave ONA, you really have to go and experience it. Because I think when you read the stories, you have one kind of response. But you could be someone who has no interest in farms, no interest in global food supply or any of these demographic issues that are coming up. When you go through there and you experience the scene and the tranquility of it, there's birds flying around. I mean, you were really there. And there are a lot of people who live in cities who have never been to that kind of environment. So they can't really relate to something like the farm crisis. So I think a lot of this comes down to, really bridging divides between people. I could tell you the next thing that I want to do with 360 video personally, and I talked to Adrian about this, is help people experience homelessness and actually go out, hang out with homeless people, with actually a guy that I'm working with who does this professionally, and have interviews with them and their experience in 360, so you can then be there. And when you feel like you're there, all of that empathetic and even body response that Lauren Covington was talking about, it kicks in. And until you experience it like that, it's hard to really explain. But it is a sort of a magical and sometimes even eerie feeling that you feel like you will have memories of having been places that you never went after you go through these experiences.
Yeah, and I'll be flat out. I didn't want this first attempt by a major news organization to represent journalistic nonfiction storytelling in this environment to be perceived or criticized as a gimmick. It's not, and we wanted to come up with an environment and a serious approach based on the principles of explanatory journalism that have been successful in other formats, and see if we could put that into this environment. It's not a gimmick, it's serious, it's meaningful, and that's why we chose the farm.
So we're actually a little bit over time now, so I think we'll have to wrap up, but I want to thank the fellow panelists here. Give them a round of applause, and also the people who, for health reasons, were not able to make it in person, but put a lot of time. I mean, even going into doing tests last night to be in the Google Hangout. I think the brain trust we have on this panel is, for this experiential media, it's really rich. So if you're interested in more, learning more about it, talk to people in the front here. We can hang out a little bit, and happy to find other collaborators to see. We want to see many flowers bloom from this concept of experiential media. So thanks very much.